Hi, you're listening to Revelation Allie by David Halem. Hope you enjoy. The alarm was making it hard for me to get my thoughts together, but I was able to give orders as well as I could. I had Delmont at the door we came through, and Piri and Eunice guarded the other door. My mind faded the droning sound into white noise that faded into itself rather than beat at short intervals. Why were these aliens being held here? Were they being used to make clones? No, if that were the case, there would have already been a human in the human chamber. And I doubt that they would have the cloning schematics so far from the cloning ward to begin with. I was shaken out of my thoughts by a thudding, hammering sound. I turned to look, and Delmont had just floored a group of guards without even summoning his anchor sword. The drumming alarm pounded in my ears again as I looked at the domes. Regardless of why these aliens are being held here, I don't want the Oddporny to have an advantage with what these aliens are capable of. Amongst the domes, in the center of the room, there was a raised platform, possibly a control platform. I had Hasana and Sagramore go investigate. There was an inhuman, almost cursed sound coming from where Piri and Eunice were, and when I looked, they were sprayed with pink blood. Hasana and Sagramore reached the control platform and looked around at everything that was within their grasp. I could tell by their body language that they were talking to each other. A voice spoke over an intercom system in a language that I didn't understand. Olwen told me that they were threatening to destroy our ships if we touched the control panels in this room, and they demand that we turn ourselves in to be questioned. Hasana and Sagramore stopped moving and looked over at me for instruction. I sure as hell don't want to be held in question by the Oddporny, and I certainly don't want them to utilize these captured aliens for whatever their intentions are. I looked at those at the door of the room we were in. They were looking at me, waiting for instruction. I opened my right hand and spread it to my stomach. Defend. They nodded and turned their attentions back to the doors they were guarding. The Oddporny don't want us touching their control panel, and I don't want to turn myself in. What if I do us both a favor? The extra space that's within each of the domes, the chambers don't overlap. Where does the space go? I dismissed my blade and held it to the floor next to one of the domes. Olwen saw what I was doing and a worried expression came over her wolf face as the intercom started spouting fast gibberish. She told me that they really don't want me to do this. To hell with them. I summoned my claymore into the floor, and the sharpest noise preceded the explosion that I experienced point blank. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was a rumbling eruption of condensed space bursting out from its crevices. I felt like I was on my back, but when I opened my eyes, I looked downwards. Was I on the ceiling? No, I think the entire room, or what was left of the room, was turned over and tumbled. I could still hear the rumbling of the eruption as the room glowed, and shadows danced by the lights of the blazing purple and black fire. There was another light that illuminated the chamber that I had just destroyed. It glowed like golden hour on the walls and smoldered parts of the fire. The green glass glistened wherever the ground decided it was, and chunks of metal and stone piled unevenly, indiscriminately on the walls, ceiling, and floor. I stood up and saw that my claymore wasn't in my hand anymore, and my hand wasn't on my wrist anymore. I grimaced. I hadn't lost a limb in a long time, but it took my whole leg about 3 hours to grow back. I didn't think it would take that long for my hand. I would have preferred losing my right hand over my left, but I guess I can't choose everything. My eyes darted about the chamber, looking for the blade of the claymore. For the longest time, I looked at the ground below me, when I should have looked at the walls or surfaces above. I found it embedded in a wall. For a second I pondered how I would get so high up on the wall until I remembered that this room isn't normal anymore. My forearm stunned as I bled out. I gripped and felt what I could only describe as a paradox. There should be something there, but there wasn't. My blood glowed on my hand as it flowed out. This severed limb isn't as clean as the last one. This one was ripped apart while the other one was a clean cut. Loose ends of my muscles were frayed from my arm like how a rope can be frayed. Regardless, it was still a pain, a nuisance. A few steps further, and I was pulled forward by the false gravity that had malfunctioned due to my actions. I fell to what had to be 20 feet, tumbling. I lost my initial balance with a yelp and landed with a crack going up my shoulder blades and into my neck. Cracked bone. Unfortunately, a condition that I was familiar with. A flaw with the Archangel armor. I was safe from attacks from different weapons, but not falls. I dismissed all the armor except for the helmet. I was startled at the heat that I felt in the chamber. With the arm that I still had, I righted myself into a position where I laid flat on my back and looking forward with my head, all so I could heal as fast as I can. My breath shook as I feel the stabbing pain in my back and neck slowly fade away as the minutes passed. Within minutes, I heard the crackling of fire and groans of distress, some in anger, others in fear. I realized that I could see two figures stretched in gold within my field of view. They were roughly human-shaped, but with their own differences that would be more apparent if they weren't drenched in the gold fluid. The fluid seemed far too familiar to just be some alien liquid found on another planet. It's familiar, in a personal way. It seems like I had seen this liquid do so much, fight for its life, destroy a world, liberate others, but only now does it all come together? Am I looking at the pieces of the Oddporny's master plan? If I am, then I'm about to turn everything they had calculated on its head, once I get myself back together again. The sprawled, golden bodies were starting to find their life again as they began to move their limbs and bodies. Likewise, I began to sit up almost painlessly as I set my eyes back to the blade as it struck onto its surface, almost glowing in a way it desired to be found. I looked around to get a small grasp of everything around me. I realized that the wall I stood on was one of the walls that we had guarded. My eyes searched for Piri and Eunice, and even Delmont, because this might have been his door. I have the feeling that Delmont would have been able to survive this without a problem, but I don't know enough about Piri or Eunice to make a good enough assumption. Those of us who survived, I hope everyone else is okay. Ludicrous. Utterly stupid. Did I really give myself enough time to think about that? My painful arm brought me back to the present, and I could see my claymore a few dozen feet in front of me. I strode forward with a certain stiffness in my posture because of my still healing back. After a few seconds of walking, my body had gotten to the point where walking was painless enough. I summoned my armor again, and a clanging sound echoed off the walls of the chamber. The blade was less than 10 feet away, and I could see why it was glowing. It was pinning another gold-blooded alien to the surface I was standing on. Should I jest a theory, or should I be cautious? With trepidation, I jest. Stepping forward, I grabbed the handle of my claymore and dismissed the blade. I crouched to inspect the glowing blooded alien, and his flesh was starting to knit together, filling in where the claymore had impaled into him. There was a knowing within myself. This one, and the others with the golden blood, are like me, but not completely. You. Her voice was behind me. Without hesitation, I summoned the blade and turned around, and with my weaker right hand, I held it as close to the level of her neck as I could. In a single second that I looked into her white eyes, I could feel my heartbeat in my stomach. She looked just as terrible as the last time I saw her. "When will you forget me?" she asked, slighted. I stepped forward, resting my blade on the bottom of the gouge in her neck. "When will you leave me alone?" She batted the blade away, and the tip hit the ground while I still held it. "When will you forget me?" she asked again, in her slighted tone. I couldn't stand those white eyes. Still with my right hand, I raised my claymore, and prepared to swing it against her. I closed my eyes to relieve myself from her eyes as I moved my weapon against her. Then Hasana screamed of fear, but that wasn't who was there before. My hesitation saved her life, as I looked on in horror of what could have been an utter disaster. We both stared at each other, as the intercom spoke in a language I didn't understand. After a long enough time, Hasana mentioned my arm, and I grimaced at the fact that she brought it up. With apprehension, she turned around to look at everything. and with a quiver in her voice, she asked me what we do now. I told her we are going to take the aliens we found under the domes. She then asked what we would do after that. I made an expression that wasn't a smile, but it had the energy like that of a child about to do something mischievous. Not that it showed past my helmet at all, but my body language could be read as much. Then I told my little war princess that we're going to cripple the Oddporny. We're going to cause something powerful and make sure that they see it to fruition. Of many things, the problem presently is that I had come here with the intent of collecting information, but I think with the pieces together in my head, I could come up with a plan that would be hard to ignore. I radioed my ship for them to teleport us and the golden-blooded aliens out of the base. I must certainly have bypassed the anti-teleportation measure that they had in place before. Within the next few sections, one by one, we were teleported from the base to my fleet. Seconds after we had all boarded onto the ships, my pilots sped us forward and out of the solar system. My heart was pounding, but at least flesh was starting to grow on my wrists again, mending the wind, but the pain was still stinging where my hand should be. The stars flew past us in beams of light, red, white, gold, and subtle blues filled the view that the round windows gave us. Someone alerted me passionately that we were being pursued. I sighed in dissatisfaction. I wasn't in the condition to fight back on my own against the oncoming ships. A few more minutes. Until then, it was up to the pilots to fight this part of the battle for me. Could we truly call a state of space a war zone? I would like to say yes, but you would have to be actively searching for a fight. Then, at that point, you have chosen your side in the battles. Am I truly choosing a side if they were the ones who initiated the discord? I gave the orders to get in a defensive fleet formation, the weaker ships in the middle, and the more powerful on the outside as we flew through space faster than a shadow could be cast. The Brecton Cube, a select few short ships, and 3 different Soto ships were in the middle, while the rest of us enveloped the former on all 6 sides. I ran up to a higher part of the bridge, getting a good enough view of everything around us. I dismissed my armor, headband, and all as I ran, catching my balance when I suddenly felt lighter. There were more than 36 silver saucers in pursuit of us, all fitted with different weaponry and armor. There was a flank that had small rapid-fire cannons on either side of the disc. Another were fitted with larger mechanisms that were powerful enough to destroy any of our ships in a single shot. And even more than that following. And others were made to be more brutish with large steel beam-shaped supports crossing across the structures, their own batting rams. Think of a plan quick, Alexandra. The absolute worst time for her to show up. Of all times, his mother had to show up right now. She doesn't care. Get the hell out of here! I growled under my breath as I gripped my slowly healing wrist. I turned away for a moment to tell my fleet to take out the large guns first, then focus on the ramming vessels. The ship began to vibrate as formation changed, and the playing field outside changed from flat and linear to unconventional. Unconventional in the sense that there was no sense of up or down when you looked at the battlefield. Some ships would be upside down, others sideways in one direction, others in another, all for the total utilization of special combat without the limits of the ground. From my own view, I could see one of my fleet shoot a solid beam of energy at an Oddporny disk, biting a large chunk out of the enemy ship, only to be taken up by a deadly energy beam from the adversary. I winced at the sight. Never had I lost so much so fast, and I'm uncertain as to how the rest of the battle will develop. There was a transmission directed to us from the Oddporny fleet. A Soto translation technology interpreted the message. Soto and Brecton fleet, what have you stolen from us has the power to destroy worlds and induce far worse conditions. Return these assets immediately, and we will cease from causing you harm, therefore letting you free. I shook my head as the pain in my wrist sunk, That arm was starting to grow small nubs of fingers from the vague hand shape that it had grown. I told the soda to relay my own message to the Oddporny fleet, and to be ready to attack as I spoke. Oddporny proxy fleet, I am not here for what I call justice. If I were, you would all perish the moment I set my eyes on your demeaning cloning base. I paused for a moment to come up with a name that wasn't my own, but instead a title. I, the brass rose of Earth, have come merely to get information. This information to aid your demise. But I have found something better than information. I found something you guard with as much passion as your lean figures could contain. I have stolen your golden trophies. As I said that, I put my bleeding stub on my right shoulder before I continued speaking. On their own, they can mold and change the world like gods of old. But for now, with me and my army, we will obliterate your petty forces. A dozen bold beams of energy shot out from my fleet, destroying and shattering slightly more than a dozen Oddporny discs. She spoke. Wrath must be an effective tool if you use it as many times as you wish. Her dry voice told me before I turned my attention back to her. Shut the hell up, I shouted at her. But you keep letting me talk, she retorted as she raised her ugly bleeding head, her glowing white eyes ever so dominant, accompanied by the laser fire and stars in the background. I raised my bleeding, reforming hand and aimed to slap her. She seemed to take it in stride and stepped forward. The ship shook violently, and the sounds of crushing metal reverberated throughout the craft, knocking me to the ground and making the lights flicker off and on a few times before they were inconsistent. I shouted into the radio for Hasana to send proxies. She responded quickly and gave the orders before cutting off the radio. Sending others to do your own bidding? That's new. Why haven't I seen that before? His mother said slyly. Go to hell, I roared as I stood up and summoned my claymore to cut her down. Oh? She suggested with a tone that suggested that what she was about to say was obvious, as she plunged her hand into her thigh and pulled out a sword that was about as long as her own leg. The sword was curved like a moon, and it was as gray as aluminum. Don't you know that as long as you think about me, that I'm already entranced inside Hell's fifth circle, and where I am, you can't find joy with anyone. Not with man, not with God, not with the universe. That statement struck me in the head as I gripped the handle of my blade with my good hand, while my left hand was standing to take on a more normal form. We both raised our blades against each other, making them clank hard as they impacted. At a glance outside, I could see that two of the Oddporny ships were now shooting each other. Hasana's own proxy attack worked to an extent. Let me go, his mother shouted as she still stood tall. I want you to die, I roared, as I came up with my claymore against her, only for her to block it with a glancing motion. It baffles me that you're so blind to understand. Her voice sounded like her own, as well as one of someone else. I'm trapped in your hell, while you've occupied yourself in another. My head was starting to hurt from everything she said, as I pushed my blade flat against her to press her against a sharp corner of a wall. I've been within your anger for so long, but have you seen your descent into violence? Violence? I inquired. She didn't say a word, but her white eyes pierced into my own with their own intensity. Also within her eyes was something different, something almost human. My heart pounded as rage spiraled up in my spine. I raised my blade and prepared to pin her head on the wall behind her. Allie, no! Slaney's voice screamed as my sword pinned into nothing a foot above her head. I was confused. She's Slaney now? I dismissed my blade and grabbed her by the hair, shouting at her. What kind of trick is this? She whimpered. Allie, stop! This isn't like you. Please stop! No, what? I pushed her to the ground, waiting for something to happen. She reeled and started to convulse and sobbing. I turned around to look up at the fight that was going on outside. There was no more than half a dozen of either of us, and it's a miracle that we're still alive. I then turned my back to her, expecting the monster, but my expectations were disappointed by the image of my crying doctor. "Mercy! Mercy!" she wailed as if she was curled up on the cold, hard floor. Twice I'd almost killed one of my own crew members because of his mother, or no. What, was it because of me? I feel like a winged monster, wrath-filled with raging fire flowing through my veins, and now the cold ashes of the fire were left sifting through my anger-worn heart. Myself. Am I really so fit to lead this small band of humans in Soto, with an anger that burns everything it touches? I can only imagine that I have a massive hit on my life after what I had done against the Oddporny, as well as the threats that I have made. Pain abused my chest with each bludgeoning heartbeat. My breath started to shake rhythmically as the tears started to form in my eye. The skin on my left hand had just finished knitting itself together, and my hand was completely whole. But it was empty and bare as I looked at the palm. Everything within me sank. My shoulders felt heavier than the armor that rested on them, returning everything to the blouse, dress, and headband that they were before. Out of sorrow and element, my mind started to line up again, but it was going straight down. I took out my radio to talk with Hasna. "Hasna?" I asked with a shaking voice. "Yes, Allie?" she responded after a second of delay. I'm so sorry for..." It became hard to talk. "Sorry for what happened at the base?" Sheila filled in for me. "I'm fine. I'll deal with it somehow." No? She inquired with trepidation in her voice. "I'm sorry for what I'm about to do next," I said quickly and broken as I could. "Allie?" I remained silent. "What are you going to do?" "Take as many of us as guidance as you want." She was quiet on the other end. "No, Allie, don't!" "No, Hasna!" I cut her off. "I'm not fit to lead the group anymore." Selene looked up at me from the ground with tears in her eyes. "Allie, you don't have to do this," she said weary. "It's necessary," I said to both of them. Both were silent. I then brought up the ship communications and directed a message to the Oddporny fleet leader coming against us. "This is a brass rose of the Soto fleet. Take me. Take the other golden, but spare the ships." Silence drug its lethargic form throughout the space. "Allie, don't," Selene said softly. I looked down at my bare hands, the golden pulse barely shining through. If I was meant to be a savior of humanity, I'm not anymore. Understood. The Oddporny came from the council. In seconds, I was in a holding cell with a dozen other of the aliens that had gold blood like me, all downcast in expression as if it were a competition. My eyes weren't focused on anything. My heart pounded in what felt like my heartless chest. Moments later, one of the walls became transparent, and an Oddporny with a decorated tattoo on his head was standing before us with a scared-looking Soda standing next to him. The tall gray alien spoke through gritted brown teeth, and the Soda translated, "Due to the nature of your stunt against the Oddporny, our judiciary leaves us no choice but to punish you all by way of banishment." One of the other aliens in the chamber spoke up in a language that I couldn't understand, and the Soda repeated the question. "Banishment? We're going to throw you into a hole that comes and goes as it pleases," the Soda translated for us. "If it were up to us, we would continue ourselves, but we have a tendency to not hold on to problems once they're in our hands. Damn right, I said under my breath. Another alien asked another question. Where are you taking us? The alien asked with far more vigor than what the timid Soda translated. The odd pony didn't give an answer. The wall simply turned back to opaque. The multicolored tension buzzed in the room as the hours passed. Some of us stood, some of us were crouched down, hugging our legs. I had made myself as small as I could in the corner. After hours and hours, our room was dropped and the walls turned into glass again as we fell into a raging storm. I couldn't find my bearings as we started to float in the air from the suspension of us falling. The storm was filled with livid blue lightning that filled the entirety of the clouds. My ears started to ring before I had even felt the rumbling of thunder. Our room was then consumed by lights as the glass shattered, and we were all struck by the blue bolts. There was less pain than what I had expected from a lightning strike. My muscles tensed and seized as I fell in the air. I would have sworn I blacked out for a few seconds before I woke up in the expense of our banishment. Suspended in the air, surrounded by clouds of thousands of colors, and a desert below. Stranded, with no hope of escape.
Hi, this is David Halem, and you just finished listening to Revelation Allie from my story, Status Stranded. I hope you enjoyed. See you next week.